they had 9 or 10 hotels and 9 or 10 general stores and literally scores of other businesses.
And how many people? This would be a population
About 2,000.
2,000 people.
Yeah, probably at its height.
All of them working like mad and playing like mad when they had the time.
Sure, and of course the 4th of July was a big holiday there. And the 4th of July, they would attract another 1,500 people into Republic.
From all around the...
And of course the main street was the showplace of Republic. So they would have drilling contests, they would have bare-knuckle fights, sometimes professionals coming in, but the big draw, I think, were the horse races. And you would have Baptiste Tonasket, who was the son of Chief Tonasket. And you can see here in this particular photograph, they're coming up the main street of Clark Avenue of Old Republic. And Baptiste Tonasket had Sandpoil Sam and then Redbird. And then
that was his horse?
That's right. And then Bill Galloway was an Irishman who had Irish Mick and Tim Toulaw. And Art May had another horse. So you had 3 or 4 guys who'd come in there, and thousands of dollars would change hands. And so Republic in those early years, the late 1890s, was a marvelous town, really never to be repeated.
Yeah. But I have a feeling there's a cloud here. I can hear it coming.
Yeah, well, like all the mining towns, what happens? You know, the false-fronted towns were essentially wooden structures. And what happens in 1899, I think it was July the 3rd, 1899, massive fire hits. Accidental fire, wasn't set by arsonists or anything else.
Everything was going well in the town.
That's right. The town was really, really booming. And this fire was out of control. They try to dynamite it in the way of the fire. And what they do, of course, they put dynamite in a building in front of the fire. They try to stop this conflagration. They were unable to do it. And before the smoke clears, half the town, half the business district lies in ruins. $100,000 damage that. And $100,000 in those days, Mike, was brutal. And half these guys weren't insured. And really, after 1899, Republic never approaches that prominence again.
Well, it makes you wonder what would have happened if one of these towns had gone completely through without the fire and then managed to continue to its ultimate conclusion, because Republic isn't over at the fire. It does not end.
No, what happens, though, between 1900 and 1910, things start to slip a little bit. You know, there's no doubt about it that the mines up the gulch are still producing some, you know, some ore and some significant ore, but it doesn't seem to go to depth. And, you know, and the high rollers who had been there, for instance, in 1911, there was a guy called Frank Rayberg, and he left Republic. He was a millionaire when he left Republic. He was a miner, and he was a broker, and he was on top of the world. Later on that year, he dies penniless, sick. That year, 1911, penniless and sick in a place called Manhattan, Nevada, a little mining camp in the high country in Nevada. So, you know, and he brushed shoulders with guys like Patsy Clark. And so that's what happens in this mining business. It really kind of goes that way. And, you know, it was an interesting town because in those early years, there were two railroad lines came in. One was called the Hot Air Line.
The Hot Air Line, but what was the real name of it?
Well, the real name was the Spokane and British Columbia, because they thought they were eventually going to reach Spokane. They never got beyond Republic. Started in Grand Forks, originated in Grand Forks, and the original owner, a guy called Holland, had great visions of it being one of the great lines of the Northwest.
But it was all hot air.
Well, most of it was hot air. And, well, here's an example, Mike.
Wasn't it usual to have a locomotive to do this kind of work?
Yeah. Well, there's some of the passengers, the poor passengers in the hot air line. You can see Spokane and British Columbia right on that particular photograph. And they're pushing the doggone car.
Now, do you know why? I mean, and there's a horse there lashed to it?
Yeah, the horse is pulling too. I imagine because the engine's gone down, okay?
Ran out of wood or something. They just forgot to stock up, you know?
They only had one engine, you know. I mean, and they wanted to get the bulk of the ore carrying business to Grand Forks into the Granby smelter, and that was logical. And, of course, then there was another line, which was called the Spokane and Washington, or, excuse me, Washington and Northern. And the Washington and Northern was a U.S. line. They wanted the ore carrying business as well. But there was
in this shot that shows the Mammoth, the Lone Pine, Blacktail, and Quilt.
Yeah.
Do you know which rail line that is along the side of it?
I believe that's the Hot Air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It ran right close to the mines.
Well,
it really
sure.
wanted to. That's a great shot to show the nature of the country and the way the mines were put in.
And what it does also show, it shows this is Eureka Gulch. This is how it looked around that's about 1908 or 1909, Mike. And the Mammoth is just, you know, was one of the last mines on the hill. But there's another one I didn't tell you about.
Another
little railroad that is probably the most unique railroad in the state of Washington. And there may be one other that to perhaps vie with it for that honor. And it was called the Belcher Mountain Railway. And Belcher Mountain was an iron proposition north of Republic. And it had an 8-mile railroad line with one engine and one passenger car, which is kind of interesting. They had 4 employees. They had the engineer, they had a conductor, they had a fireman, and I think they had a brakeman. And that was it. And quite often, they would carry one passenger. And they would hook up that passenger car on the Belcher Mountain Railway. And the passenger would sit there in his regal splendor, in solitary splendor, I must say, and be taken down that 8 miles down to a place called Caraman, where they would team up with the Washington Northern.
And if the function of this Belcher Mountain Railway was just to not just transport that one guy, but transport the ore from the iron area down to this interconnecting line?
They never really got off.
It was just a single guy's idea of a good time?
There were 75 people at Belcher Mountain at the maximum, and the owner evidently liked the railroad, and he wanted to have his own railroad. It was his toy. He got the railroad.
Remarkable. Anyway, here we've got this, you know, Eureka Gulch, come Republic.
Yep.
After the fire, pounding along still, but, I mean, it's just sort of holding its own at this stage, I take it.
Actually, Republic's starting to slip a little bit.
Yeah.
And what happens is something kind of unique in the annals of mining in the West. They'd gone over all the old mines, the Blaine, and they'd gone over the Republic and the Quilp and the, you know, the half a dozen others. And they all started to pinch out at depth. When I say depth, 300 or 400 feet, the ore was gone. But in 1910, something happens. A couple of leasers pick up a little property, and it's called the Nob Hill. And this was one of the original claims that had been ignored, Mike, for 15 years.
When we come back from this break, we'll take a look at the long-forgotten Nob Hill claim. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and we're just about to go into a claim discovered in '96, but then really burned, just sort of shelved for a while?
Yeah, it was never thought it would be much of a claim, and this was beyond really just out of the gulch. So it was out of Eureka Gulch. Nobody paid much attention to it. This is the Nob Hill. Some leasers picked that up in 1910, and they start producing some gold. They think it's going to run out of depth. It doesn't run out of depth. So they keep on producing, 1915, 1920, through the 20s, through the 30s, through the 1940s, through the 1950s, through the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, just closed down a few years ago. And this was one of the legendary producers of the continental United States. Before it runs its course, the Nob Hill mine produces 2,400,000 ounces of gold. Now, Mike, let's put that in the right context. 2,400,000 ounces of gold is approximately 200 tons of pure gold.
How does this compare to any other big producer, to Rossland or whatever?
Less than Rossland, you know, because you had the Leroy and the War Eagle and the Center Star and all the rest, but about the same as the total produced by the Headley Mascot and the Nickel Plate mine in Headley. So it's a big mine, and this is from one mine. I mean, there were lots of other mines there, you know. I mean, there was the Jim Blaine, and there was the Republic, which produced a lot of gold for about 10 years, or 5 or 6 years anyway. And you had the Quilp and the Lone Pine and the Mammoth and all the others. So add that to the total, and you have a magnificent, almost an historic mining town in the northeastern part of Washington.
Mining, obviously, does not attract large populations.
No.
I mean, even after, because the Republic didn't go through a resurgence when Nob Hill came on the scene.
No, I remember Republic in the 1940s, and it was a very interesting town. This is before the fires had hit the town, and then they started taking their inevitable toll, as they always do. And one of the hotels that was burned down and lost everything in the fire, real Holocaust, they actually had in the corner of that hotel on kind of a stage was a mechanical band. And with figures this high, and there's somebody be playing the drums, and somebody be playing the French horn, and somebody be playing something up, and you'd actually pay to have that band start up an operation, and they would play marvelously well. Now, that was a museum piece, and that's gone. And there probably wasn't another in the United States. Really quite a remarkable town. And, you know, I go back into that area, and the area itself is really quite interesting. And I'll tell you a little about it. In fact, I was just back there about 3 or 4 months ago, and this is a piece I picked up just south of Republic, with a number of other pieces, sticking Johnny and some coins and some bottles and so on.
Well, you walk down the street and go to a door and say, "Excuse me, could you supply me with a spittoon, for example?"
Well, actually, what I was doing, I was driving by on the highway on my day off, and I was going down towards old Danville and Curlew, and between Danville, at least between Curlew and Republic, in a field were a bunch of people. And they were having kind of a swap meet. So I went down there, and some of this marvelous stuff was there, including some mining books and the spittoon and the sticking johnnies and some coins and some tokens and everything else.
I've got a whole bunch of stuff here. We saw this in one of the opening shots of it, but this is a 10-cent, American 10-cent bill?
That's a fractional note, yeah.
A fractional note?
Yeah, yeah.
We, like Canadians, had shin plasters.
We had shin plasters. They had fractional notes. Yeah.
And look at this is a silver bread tray.
Yeah. Well, that's actually it's a plate.
Pewter?
Yeah, it's a pewter type.
Pewter type. Remarkable. So, just closes down. The Nob Hill stops producing in 1980s.
Yeah.
So nearly 90 years from its beginning.
Well, yeah, really about 70, a little over 70 years, almost three-quarters of a century. But, you know, it isn't really the end of that area. I find that whole area really quite intriguing, Mike. I think that there's still some mineral riches in the area. And remember that 94% of that ground is overburdened. And I think there's probably a continuation, so do a lot of mining men, somewhere between Republic and Old Curlew and Danville.
But you're not going to find it just kicking around the dirt on the top of the ground, because you have to get down to depth.
You have to see the formation. You have to get to bedrock.
Well, is somebody out there exploring right now, or are there drill rigs?
Number of mining companies are out there right now.
So maybe a whole other brand new rush to the Republic area.
Maybe another Nob Hill.
Yeah. We've spent so much time on Canadian mines and ghost towns. Did the northern United States, northern Washington, have as many as southern BC?
Actually, we were a little fortunate on the Canadian side. Most of the great mines were just across the Canadian line. Take Phoenix, for example, just over the line. Red Mountain and Rossland, 7 miles over the line. Phoenix was only a few hundred yards over the line.
Yeah.
So some of these mines were almost right on the line, but on our side.
The story of Eureka Gulch, which became Republic, and it could have been renamed Nob Hill if they'd wanted to, and it's gold in that northern Washington country that produced right up until the mid-1980s. That's our story for today. Join us again next time for Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Bye-bye.